And now we're live. Welcome everyone to our live stream for May. We were sad to miss April last month, but we're glad to be back and glad to have Naomi as our founder and executive director answering questions today about Be Emboldened, all the things that you want to know, and we're excited to answer your questions too. So Naomi, thanks for being here today on our live stream for May. How are you doing today?
Better than I was in April, which is why we're here today. And we weren't in April. So for anyone who was planning to attend last month or wanted to do the replay, sorry about that. I'm still not fully over it, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I just say that because, I'm going to mute as I need to so you don't hear me cough or clear my sinuses, which is not a lovely sound. And, but it has been a really rough cold and flu season in our house. I don't know if there's any parents out there who can resonate. I don't know if it's from quarantining before that and like kids not actually being around others. And then suddenly they are, and they're just bringing everything home. And, but I feel like my immune system went back 10 years. I'm like, why am I catching everything? I should have something built up at my age where I'm not catching everything. So it's been challenging, but it's May 12th, right? Like, is flu season, cold season over? Are we done?
Hopefully soon.
Please can we be done?
Yes, let's get on to summer.
Right.
Oh, wow. Well, we're thrilled to have you here, Naomi, and just really getting to answer some questions that I think are really relevant right now with what's going on in the world. And at this moment in time, it's important to be asking thoughtful questions about the work that we're doing, the why, the vision, the how. So I'm excited to get into some of those questions today. And for anyone watching, definitely add your questions to the chat. We're going to be monitoring that, and I'm going to be viewing those and seeing if we can fit them in today. We only have a half hour, so we'll try to get through everything that we can. But Naomi, is there anything you'd like to start off with before we dive into some questions?
Well, actually, Natasha, I just remembered someone who knows a lot more than me about technology, which is not actually a hard title to get, told me that if I wear my AirPods with my microphone, something gets messed up. So you might lose me for a second. I'm going to take these out.
Okay. You were sounding great before, but yeah, we'll listen to whoever gave that advice. We'll follow it.
Okay. I saw your lips moving, but I couldn't hear anything. Now you're back. Okay.
I'm back. Yeah, and we can hear you as well. So we've got excellent connection and it sounds great.
Good, because I've noticed on some of our streams we've done, the audio is not great. So again, for all of you, we're trying to understand all of this better and make sure that you have really good quality to listen to and watch, because that's just not enjoyable otherwise. I don't want you to suffer through to get your content. So yes, thank you for your kindness, and we are continuing to learn, and that is a fun tip I got recently. So let's get started.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's dive in here with talking about Be Emboldened, the work we're doing, the why, the everything. First of all, a phrase we use a lot is spiritual or religious abuse. It's important to define terms so we all know what we're talking about. So let's talk about that. What is Be Emboldened's working definition of spiritual religious abuse?
Sure. So I'm gonna read it to you because I don't have it memorized, although I would like to, and it's on my to-do list. Right now, and I say like truly, I mean it right now, currently, because these definitions can change over time, and the more feedback we get and the more we're interacting with people who have suffered, and the more exposure we have to other content as well, it is possible that we will continue to tweak this definition. Currently, the definition we're working off of is the use of spiritual or religious language and or beliefs. So language and or beliefs could be both or one or the other, used to unduly influence and exert control over individuals, exploiting vulnerabilities for the apparent benefit of the organization or those in positions of greater authority or power. So to kind of boil this down a bit, it's using these aspects of religion to control others, to take advantage of them, for really what ends up being the benefit of the leader or the few leaders or whatever positions are engaging in this behavior. But it's done in such a way that the person being exploited thinks they're doing it for usually the good of the greater church at large, like our big C church, or they're doing it directly unto God. They're doing it to honor God. And so there's this twist in what our right relationship with the Lord actually looks like.
Yeah, that's great. Just curious, do you find that there are other definitions out there that are maybe in conflict with this, or do you see this spiritual abuse definition being used poorly?
I don't know that I've seen anything where I'd say it's in conflict. I would say I've seen definitions that I would say leave out important nuances to the definition, to how this actually functionally plays out for people. So I have seen definitions that maybe aren't quite as thorough, or maybe don't highlight, again, some of these kind of what I would think to be core aspects of religious abuse. I have also seen the word abuse just not used as kind of a proper definition, that sometimes it's watered down. Now, we also speak to something being unhealthy. Something can be unhealthy and still be a problem, and we still need to handle it. We take that very seriously. It doesn't necessarily meet the abuse definition, though. And so that can get confusing. We have a lot of terms just culturally that get thrown around more lightly than they should be, because it's not actually the accurate definition. Trauma itself can be one. PTSD can be another one. Narcissism is definitely one that I keep hearing out of context these days, and abuse can be one of those. And so again, the point is not that someone who is claiming abuse and maybe it wasn't healthy, that it doesn't matter, or it's less than, or we're not going to take it seriously. It's incredibly important. We see a lot of unhealthy behaviors in the church, and they are absolutely concerning. And again, they need to be addressed. Where we can run into difficulties with other disciplines, different areas of serving, as when those definitions are so different that the truth of what someone has experienced and the genuine harm that they've experienced gets minimized and kind of set to the side because of the disparity in language.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So we're trying to define terms in a better way, have a term for all of it, so everyone has a term they can use and has ways to express what they've experienced, because everyone should be listened to. Everyone's experience should be heard and should be taken seriously, and action should be taken to come alongside that individual, to love them well, and to help correct whatever went wrong wherever that took place. But again, when we have significant differences in language, some people are like, well, no, that's not what that is. And they just kind of slough it off. That's wrong on their part. I hold them accountable for doing that. But we also want to try to streamline the language so that we can better understand one another.
Absolutely. That's just a great example of why it's so important to define those terms and make sure that we're on the same page in a discussion. For those of you who are joining us, we are talking about the questions related to this work that are really important to answer. And one related to that, what we just talked about, is a definition of cult. So what is Be Bolden's working definition of a cult?
So this one actually does have a lot of variety out there. Cults, defining cult is still, it's a little bit of a moving target. And the direction we've taken is that of Dr. Stephen Hassan. So he put out the BITE model of undue influence. And we do have that linked on our facts page on our website if someone wants to take a look at what that model is, because what I love about the PDF version is it gives examples of each category. And so it helps people wrap their heads around, well, did I experience this category in this one? And yeah, it gives you some, legs to what it would actually look like. The BITE model stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And to warrant the label of a cult, a group would demonstrate acts of undue influence in all. So we do have groups that are cult-ish. Not to necessarily reference the podcast, the podcast cultish, though check them out if you haven't. So there are many that are cult-ish in their functioning, but they wouldn't necessarily be considered a cult without meeting that full criteria based on the model that we're following. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, though, this label is much less important than the characteristics of the actual environment. Mm-hmm. The experience and well-being of members, of the individuals who are being abused, the impact on loved ones who have been affected by this abuse, like that's really what matters. But again, language can be helpful. It can also sometimes get in the way. We have a podcast episode out with the wonderful Lindsay Mendenwall of Mama Bear Apologetics about, is it even helpful to use the word cult? When is it helpful? How should we use it? When does it bring people together versus totally shut them down, which doesn't serve to shut people down. So when is that helpful? When is it not? I know me personally, when I was first told I was in a cult, that was not helpful. No. It did not go over well. And it was my fiance who said it. So it almost didn't end well for him. It can really create more of a division, and it can actually create more of an us versus them mentality. When we think of the historical effect of persecution tends to bond people together. Mm-hmm. And there are times in history where that has been a beautiful thing. I even think back to growing up in Buffalo, and this wasn't persecution, unless you're going to say nature persecutes us, the weather, but just growing up in Buffalo and getting crazy snowstorms and ice storms. And when everyone was like, we're out of, our electric's out and we don't have heat, and we're, food really was an issue sometimes because stores were closed and elderly, like we're running out of things. And just the way the community came together in those circumstances was so beautiful. And Buffalo is known as being the home of good neighbors, or like something like that. Mm. And it's true. We see that through the seasons that we literally have to live through, the climate. And that's just a very minor example, kind of a small natural example. But when we talk about, imagine that in a group that's being persecuted, and how people will come together and they'll become more tight knit, and we'll see an increase in groupthink. And so if we're going to come at a group, or we're going to come at an individual and say, you're in a cult, and we're just going to, come in hot like that, they're probably more likely to be like, us versus them. And it doesn't open the door for relationship, and opening the door for relationship is so important. And it's the model that Christ gave us to engage people, to sit down and eat with them and ask questions. Jesus asked a lot of questions, and it wasn't because he didn't know the answers. So
that's so good.
So yeah, that's how we see cult. The one other note I want to add, and this is going to be tweaked on the facts page on the website, is that when we're talking about a pseudo-Christian cult specifically, and this could absolutely apply to a cult of Buddhism, a cult of Muslim, like this could apply in any religious area, but we're looking at a difference in theology as well. Mm-hmm. That can come into play. So for example, if I had someone come to me and maybe they didn't hit 4 areas of that bite model, but there's a lot of theological twists going on that have been used to manipulate them, that's something else we want to take really seriously. Again, does it fit the full definition of cult or not that we go based on? Maybe, maybe not. I'm honestly way less concerned about that than I am about that person's healing and helping to work through that incorrect doctrine so that they can know the truth of who Christ is and Christianity, and they can genuinely choose it for themselves or not. Yeah. And again, that could apply to any religion. Every religion has a set of beliefs. And so if you kind of have a cult of that, where they veered from the doctrine, then it's no longer actually the authentic version.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking to the person's experience, I want to answer this next question before we get into the how of this work and how it's done and the approach that we're going for. Can you give us a working definition of trauma? This was another word you mentioned has a lot of maybe meaning or misuse. So give us the definition of trauma.
Yes, and there are many definitions for this one as well, and there are many good definitions of trauma. The definition that Be Emboldened is working off of currently is an individual's emotional, psychological, and physiological response to a distressing experience, likely unexpected, or sudden or unpredictable in nature, and involving a serious threat that feels beyond the person's control. So they feel threatened in a way where they cannot control that. They cannot keep themselves safe. Mm-hmm. So within trauma, we do recognize that there's the potential for complex trauma in our clients who may have experienced repeated abuses prior to the age of 18. In addition, we recognize the possibility of a compounding event later on in the client's life. And there are various ways that these factors can impact an individual's needs in their healing process. So those are two things that we're just aware of when we're talking about trauma. And a compounding event would be after someone's past the age of 18, if they've had childhood trauma, and then they have a trauma as an adult, that's considered a compounding event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. So in light of all of that, what is the approach that Be Bolden is taking to do this work? Someone asked in the chat, and this is related, what do you mean that you do work from the Christian worldview? So those two are kind of related. Can you speak to that foundational approach that Be Bolden is coming at?
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell you a little story.
We love story time.
I hope y'all don't mind. Being someone who was told I was something that come to find out I was not, find it incredibly just personally important that I be upfront about what I am. I was told that I was Christian my whole life. And at 28 years old, I realized I had not been. And now I could decide if I then believe Christianity to be true or not. That is my free will ability. I have a sense of agency. I get to make that decision. I'm thankful that I get to make that decision. I think everyone should be able to make that decision for themselves. I then went on to investigate Christianity from scientific angles, went back to the Bible and like, what on earth does this thing actually say? Is it the word of God? Is there God? Like, what do I do with all of this? Like, that was not what I thought it was. What do I do with all this? When I then made the decision to believe in Christianity and to claim Christ as my Lord and Savior, is like, I think the evidence is overwhelming and I find this to be accurate. So when I made that decision, I found it to be really important as we launched to Be Emboldened that people know where I stand. Now, that does not mean that we serve people who stand where I stand. That doesn't matter. And that's probably a separate question. So I'll just leave that for now. I'll set it aside. We'll come back to it. But Be Emboldened, serving from a Christian worldview, which is our foundational approach. I believe very strongly, and board of directors and Be Emboldened team and volunteers agree with this, and everyone may not, but we do all have lenses through which we see the world. And as a practitioner, as a clinician, it's really important that I meet people where they're at. And it's important that I take my perspective and I put it aside to the best of my ability to see where they are and to come alongside them. But to try to deny that I have a worldview from which I operate out of, I think we can only go so far with that. Like if someone came to me, and I don't have an example, but I'm sure there are things that come up where, I have a reason I give the response that I give. Like when I speak about hope, I'm in my mind, I'm speaking about my hope in Christ. Now I don't project that on someone. They get to choose that. But I want people to know where I'm coming from, because otherwise I feel like I'm being dishonest. I feel like I'm concealing information, and that's way too familiar to what was done to me. And I just refuse to do that to somebody else. So our foundational approach is a Christian worldview. It is biblical Christianity. I would use the word orthodox, but I want to clarify that that's not fundamentalist. Be Bolden would not identify with what many would call fundamentalism. And again, we start to get in terms that are confusing. So if someone has more specifics on that, please let us know. If you hear something and you put a comment in the chat later, like ask a question so we can answer it. Because again, even fundamentalist versus orthodoxy, I had someone come to me and say I'm a fundamentalist, and it like made me laugh. So I was like, that's crazy, because what I think of and what I picture when I think fundamentalist is so not like I think orthodox. And they're like, no, that's fundamentalist because they're more progressive. And it's like, okay, well, like we're not talking the same language. Because of that, we do have a statement of faith on our website. If you take a look at it, it's pretty, I would say it's pretty standard. It's a pretty standard statement of faith for a Christian organization. More so sticks to like, this is what's in the creeds. And we're staying there. There's a lot of secondary issues in Christianity. There's a lot of tertiary issues in Christianity. And so we are keeping it with the essentials in our statement of faith. And again, that is for full transparency for anyone who works with us. I talk to people who are atheists. I talk to people, I've talked to people who have gone in a new age direction. And the organization as a whole does that. And if someone is okay with it, and I always ask permission, if someone has been hurt with the Bible has been used to harm them, and they are at a point where it is safe to use the Bible as evidence that what they were told isn't actually in there. They may not believe it to be the word of God. It may just be a book to them, but it can be powerful for someone's healing process to see that book doesn't even say that. And so it's like, gosh, like, where did this person get that from? And so it can be helpful in piecing together their story, and what their experience of their story is going to be as they continue to heal and reflect back on it. But that's something where I ask permission. Is it okay? Would it be of benefit to you if I do that? If it would not be a benefit to you if I do that right now, then we're not going to. And that is because the Bible itself, unfortunately, has oftentimes been used in religious trauma to genuinely wound people. And so they're afraid of it. It's incredibly triggering. It's incredibly scary. And that breaks my heart, because it's not what the Bible should be used to do. It's not what it says. But again, we come alongside people for where they're at. And I understand that experience because I went through it myself. And so I just have endless compassion and empathy and patience for people. Just, hey, this is a marathon. This is a journey, and it's going to be fine. Like we don't need to rush where people dissociate and, people totally shut down and they feel like, I just can't handle this, so I've got to just run away. Like I can't have anything to do with spirituality or, And the hope again is for people to heal, to a point where they genuinely get to choose. Because when I was so broken and devastated by the death of my parents and what that symbolized for me, because I was the tugging at my worldview. I was told they couldn't die. And so when they did, it was like, well, how did that happen? And I didn't have the goodbye experience I should have had. My dad's illness was hidden from me. I didn't even know he was dying. And so to go through that, if I had remained in that place and made a decision about my worldview, I would have been responding and making a decision in response to my trauma. And we all do that for a while, but I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to take steps forward in healing and make a decision that I truly wanted to make, that was truly mine and not just in response to something that had almost killed me. And that took time. And that's my desire for other people. And if they do not choose the same that I chose, I still care about them, and I'm still here. And Be Emboldened is hopeful to be able to come alongside and serve.
Absolutely. That transparency and openness is so important, which is exactly why we're hosting something like this, a live stream, to get your questions answered directly about what we do and how we do it. And the intent is to give everyone that dignity to make that choice. Thank you so much, Naomi. You did address, or you mentioned this, and so I do want to come back to this question of, we're clear on how our approach is, or what that approach is, but does Be Emboldened serve non-Christians? You started to address that, so I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so again, excuse me, we absolutely respect an individual's right to form beliefs for themselves. And we find it to be of the utmost importance, especially because those who we serve, they've had this freedom restricted in the past in one way or another, and it should not have been. So due to the nature of the work, again, we believe in the need for transparency in order to establish just trust in relationships. We openly discuss our belief system. We desire to cultivate and provide an environment that encourages safe, honest, and fruitful conversation. But we do not desire to push our beliefs on someone else either. Our hope is that our clients will come to know who Christ is, what they believe, what they want to do, and that they'll make their own choice based on accurate information rather than based on the agenda of an abusive leader. Yeah. But again, I mean, there's clients that we work with where it's not a part of the conversation right now because it can't be a part of the conversation right now. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And along those same lines, I would say I can answer this question too, but if you have anything to add, feel free. But we also get asked, does Be Bolden only serve those who have experienced cult abuse? And the answer is no, by what we've already talked about before. There's a spectrum of what trauma looks like and what those experiences are, and healthy versus abuse, et cetera. So we're here for all of it.
Yes, we are here for all of it. And for anyone who has that impression, that's my fault. And it's because it's more so my personal niche than Be Emboldened. Be Emboldened serves this, I call it a spectrum of unhealth, from an unhealthy religious experience where it's like, that was not what it should have been. This doesn't make sense. That was not okay, to abuse. And then, there's various forms of abuse that can take place within religious sphere. And then, cult, which is encompassing all sorts of areas. And again, different qualifications sort of meet that. I've experienced, unfortunately, I've experienced all of it because I came out of the cult and then experienced religious abuse within mainstream Christianity. I also experienced unhealthy stuff. And, all of it matters to me, and I hold it all equally of value and importance. And I hold the experience of people equally in value and importance. And I hold the actual people the same. My personal just area of interest and niche is more cult specific. And so that may come out sometimes as the executive director, but it's something I try to be conscious of. And we're trying to make sure that we're taking it from all these different angles, and that we're, sharing stories from these different angles as well. And something else that I was just thinking about yesterday was like, gosh, our podcast has been doing so much like scriptural correction lately and theological correction lately, which is great and is important. And I'm like, I need some more therapists up in here. Like, we need to, like, where's my mix? And we kind of lost the mix for a minute because there just aren't a whole lot of people doing this work in that capacity. But all of you, I had the most amazing call this morning before this with someone who's doing incredible work as a therapist. And we were going to plan a couple of episodes, or at least one. I guess I only asked for one, but she was open. So we'll see where it goes. And getting connected with that individual's network. And so there definitely there's so much to this. And something that I so firmly believe in is that we need to approach this from all sides, because people, they need it. This is not just a theological issue. This hurts hearts. It hurts souls. It confuses minds. It hurts bodies at times, depending on the abuse that someone's taking. And this can be a holistic issue. And so we need a holistic approach.
Absolutely. We're at the top of the hour, but Naomi, do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yes.
Well, I think this ties in really well with what you're just talking about, but what is Be Bolden's vision for the future? You've talked about all these different things that we're wanting to dive into and expand on. So can you tell us about that?
Sure. It's so funny because when I started this, it was like, I have no vision. What am I doing? And now I'm like, I'll never get it all done. It's never all going to happen.
It's a life work.
Yes. And it's a good problem to have. Like, I'm so thankful that I continue And gosh, like our board is just the incredible input that we have. And we're starting an advisory board soon. So, I mean, adding their vision, it's just amazing. And so when we put it all together, I'm so glad that we can always see, where we want to head to. That's so important when you're creating an organization and you're serving people. So art is international. So the way I've put it, which was said to me by someone else last year, she was like, oh gosh, wait, now I'm blanking on how she said it. Be internationally minded. Oh, Natasha, do you remember this?
Oh man.
Internationally minded, but locally focused.
I knew local was part of it.
Yes. And that, although I forgot it, it was very impactful. And that is true to what we're doing. So internationally minded of people from all cultures can engage with us. I met with someone in Italy this week. I met with someone in Australia, South Africa. I mean, it's just incredible. Just to see crossing borders and cultural boundaries and getting to learn and to come alongside. It's just an incredible gift. I really mean, it's just amazing. And such good places to go visit in the future, So, we are focused internationally. We're internationally minded in that whatever we want to create, whatever we're going to create, whatever resources we're doing and trainings we're doing and all of these sorts of things, we want to do it with an awareness that it could be accessed from anywhere. And we want to continue to grow in ways that make it accessible. But also be focused more locally. And by that, I don't necessarily mean local, like the town that I'm in, although that certainly applies. I mean that I want what we're doing to feel like it was done for the person who's engaging with the material. Like we want to impact on a macro level, worldwide scale, because this is a macro level worldwide issue. But we want to do it in such a way that the individual feels seen and heard, and that they feel cared for. Yeah. And so that is our approach and our vision for how we're moving and we're doing things. We continue to be focused both in the areas of prevention and in healing. And there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, we have strategic plans, for where we're heading and what we want to do. But I think my biggest point that I want to make here is we can't do it alone. And so building relationships with other people, like the call I had earlier today, and being able to collaborate and hopefully create just a bigger network of people who can and are serving in relation to this area is of the utmost importance and something that we're really excited about.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. And we just got a question in the chat actually that really ties into this. You mentioned internationally minded. So the answer to this is pretty apparent, but are there many people these days coming out of cults or abusive groups that are seeking help? Each person matters, just like you said, we have that individual focus. So numbers aren't vitally important, but wondering about this. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. And I think I think Larry put that through. So hi, Larry, happy belated birthday, Connie. Happy early birthday to your daughter on Sunday. Yes. It's actually overwhelming. It's not a thing of the past, you guys. This is it. I feel like every time I talk to someone in a new state or in a new country, I'm just blown away by how prevalent it is in that state or that country. I keep thinking like, oh, this area is like a hub. And then I hear about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, like every area is a hub. This is everywhere. And when I talk about that again, I'm not talking about the unhealthy mainstream experiences that we very much care about. I'm talking about at least cultish, all the way to, full blown cult experience. I mean, compounds being built in the United States, compounds that I didn't even know. I drive 30 minutes from, I didn't even know they were there with guards around. I mean, yes, it is very prevalent. There are groups that are growing very quickly right now. They're growing rapidly. I know I've said this before, but if someone hasn't heard it, here in the United States specifically, college campuses are a huge, huge location for recruitment for certain cult groups. And so that's where, again, we really want to focus more there in our prevention area of we need to get our kiddos equipped before they go off to college, because they're certainly at risk with the lack of just rootedness they have in general in that season of their life, just naturally being in a new place, discovering their community for the first time, making decisions about worldview and the meaning of life and what they're going to do with their lives. Are they going to get married or not? Are they going to, there's just so much like, who are my friends? And just naturally in that, love bombing can be really effective, and certain other tactics can be really effective. And unfortunately, these groups, they withhold very key bits of information until it's not so far of a leap anymore. It's like, oh, you've invested, we've eased you closer. Now you just got to hop to get on board with this person is Christ reincarnated. So yes, it is rampant. And yeah, Larry, it continues actually to shock me. It probably shouldn't anymore. I think, didn't I just tell you yesterday, Tasha, I think I got off a call or something. I'm like, I thought I had heard it all. I keep thinking I've heard it all. And then I hear something else. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You guys, this is tragic. This is absolutely tragic. And it's going to take a lot, but it's just like healing. Are we ever even fully healed? That's a whole philosophical conversation. But healing takes time, and yet it continues to improve as we go. Yeah. So it's not like, well, I'm going to be here for 5 years and then it'll just be better. So I got 5 years of it. No, like it's better as we go. And that's what it's going to be like for this work. Yeah, there's a ton to do and it's going to take a long time. It's going to take beyond my lifetime. But it's going to get better as we go.
Absolutely. And if you'd like to be part of it, you can donate to this work. I mean, this is just, it's clear what the need is, how many resources are needed out there, and the work that we're doing to get those to people. We need your help. So check us out and please donate to this work to move this mission forward. Naomi, I'd love to, we have 2 other questions here, but I think one's really important before we go further is just to talk about what experience and qualifications, especially education, that you bring to this work.
So again, Be Bolden isn't just me, but I certainly understand the question as founder and as the executive director of the organization. So I appreciate that question. And for me personally, I'll speak to that in a second, but when I've looked back over just my life and my experience, that how they kind of come into play with the work I'm doing now, which I never foresaw. Even when I started this, I don't know if I quite saw it. But when I look back, I can see so many different things that are coming into play. And I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I do see these 3 categories. The category of education, which would be my master's degree in social work, being licensed in the state of Colorado. And then, a couple of classes away from my master's degree from Denver Seminary, which has been so important in getting my feet planted solidly in the areas of, biblical studies, theology, apologetics. It's just been so important, just spiritual growth and maturity in general. And so I see that aspect. And then the continuing education, when you're licensed in a state as a practitioner, for me specifically in Colorado, I have to do 20 hours. It's like 40 hours every 2 years, but essentially 20 hours a year of continuing education units that I have to submit to maintain my licensure. I'm also under a supervisor right now, whom I meet with weekly, just continued growth, which is so important. And so there's that area of education. And then there's the experiential piece of the work I'm doing, the people that I have the honor of mentoring and hearing their stories and learning from them and learning through, their resilience and perseverance and experiences I've had in other areas, being COO of a previous company, which I was the first hire. So we built that from the ground up into a multi-million-dollar organization that was a for-profit in the event industry pre-COVID. And so that was like a really amazing experience, getting to lead a team and pour into people to help raise up other leaders. It's just something I love. And working as a hospice social worker for years, grief and loss, which ties in so well. It's a huge missing piece in this conversation. Typically, from what I found is the losses that people take and the grieving process that goes along with it. Someone can exit a cult and not be celebrating because of the losses they've taken, and they are grieving. And we need to honor that and be present with them in that pain. So there's that piece of it. And then there's a lived experience piece of, having been raised in a pseudo-Christian cult myself. And then, like I said, experiencing some mainstream church experiences that were unfortunate. So it's those three areas coming together that have put me in a position of like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. Like I can see that. Like when I put it on paper, I'm like, yeah, I can see that. And additionally, I love it. Like it's so me. Mm-hmm. Like I get to be me, and I don't mean that in some like flippant, just like, or whatever way. It's like, no, like this just makes sense for who I am in my life at this point. And so I'm so thankful that I get to kind of pull it all together in a way that hopefully, loves others well. Yeah. And, as the team continues to grow, the needs will depend, they'll vary based on what the person's role is going to be. But I'm really thankful that I have all three in this position. I think if I even lost one of them, it would be a significant loss for the organization, for those that we serve. So I'm glad I have it, because you all deserve way more than me. Mm. Oh gosh. Yeah. And I mean that people who have suffered in this way, like they just, yeah. They should be loved. They should be loved the best way possible. And I'm not saying that is me, but I'm glad that I have what I do, at least, to offer.
Well, and I just want to speak to how amazing and truly, coming from a Christian worldview myself, how I see God having orchestrated your experiences and what you've gone through in your life before you even knew what it would all mean or how it would all work out. You couldn't have planned this. You couldn't have started at 15 years old and said, this is the trajectory of my life. And this is what I'm going to go to college for. And this is the experience I'm going to get, the job's going to have in order to do this thing. There was no way that you could have planned that. And just to look back on the faithfulness of how God has prepared you for this work and prepared you to serve others in just a very specific, unique way, that we are, as a team, just incredibly grateful for you leading this effort and being able to have that experience, that education, that knowledge, and that passion that no one could have planned apart from divine intervention, in my humble opinion. So we're thrilled and so thankful to have you leading the helm in these efforts.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And no, I didn't know at 15, but I did know at 15 that what I was suffering through was going to be temporary and that I was going to be okay and it was going to make sense someday. I just had this feeling that would be the case. And it's really incredible over 20 years later to be like, oh yeah, there was faithfulness in that. And it's, I don't want to do it again, but I wouldn't take it back. And I know many survivors who then become, lived experience experts and share their story. They're like, gosh, it's such a gift to be able to give back. But this is it still feels beyond me. And I mean that. I am thankful for the qualifications I have. I think they're necessary. I think they're important. I think that someone in this position should have them. And yet these are real people. And yeah, I'm still a person. I'm not perfect. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I want everything for them.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who are listening, may this give you hope. Whatever you're going through, if there's something that you are struggling with in this regard, know that there is hope and it can be found. And we are here to walk alongside you in that. So we're so glad that you joined us today for these questions from Naomi, getting to answer what's on your heart and mind. If you have any other follow-up questions after this conversation, please feel free to put them in the chat, leave them in the comments. If this is no longer live, and you can, we will do our best to answer those and get back to you for those. So we're here to be transparent and to be open and honest about what we're doing and how, and we're just so thankful that you're part of our community. Naomi, anything else you want to add before we close out?
I think we're good. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I hope I just want to get to meet more people in person. Good heavens. This virtual stuff is just killing me, you guys. I'm an in-person person. I'm like, I'm so thankful we have this, but so we're going to need an in-person conference or something in the future, or I don't know, so that we can actually meet people face to face. But thank you for, using the technology. Thanks for being here. It's great to be able to answer your questions. And absolutely, if you have any questions, someone's watching this in the replay or something comes up later, please do reach out. Yeah, the transparency is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, with that, we're glad you're here, and please reach out. And we hope that you have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much, Naomi.